Hey, what is up guys, Mergaman4 here, and today I'm going to be giving you my thoughts and opinions on Twice Upon a Time, Christmas special, multi-doctor episode, Regeneration, the end of multiple eras. This episode has a lot to live up to, and so the question is, does it succeed? So I think Twice Upon a Time is a really curious case actually, because it has so many different things that it's promising, so many things it has to succeed in doing, and for the most part I think it does a good job balancing these elements. However, this episode is essentially pure filler, but it's enjoyable filler, which has both its advantages and its disadvantages. I can understand why it exists because of the situation. For those of you that don't know, Chris Chibnall did not want to start his era on a Christmas special, and Stephen Moffat had originally written World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls as both his and Peter Capaldi's final episodes. So I'm not exactly sure at which stage Stephen Moffat decided that he would also write the Christmas special. I assume it was relatively close to when production on the episodes began, or even after it began, because otherwise he would have been able to change the script and had Twice Upon a Time actually be his full-out Regeneration episode. But anyways, Stephen Moffat took up that role because he was worried that if Doctor Who didn't have a Christmas special this year, the BBC would fill that slot with something else and Doctor Who would lose its Christmas special slot forever. And so even though the episode is definitely written just as an excuse to have Peter Capaldi's Regeneration be prolonged, I still think it's an enjoyable episode and does some really neat things. And even though I do think The Doctor Falls works better as a Regeneration story, I'm still glad that we got Twice Upon a Time over the alternative of not having any Christmas episode at all and potentially not having any other Christmas episodes in the future. So I do think it was worth the sacrifice, especially because Twice Upon a Time, while it doesn't do an amazing job at being a Regeneration episode, I do think it still does a good job. And in part, Twice Upon a Time doesn't have the full job of Regeneration episode because The Doctor Falls already did the part of killing the Doctor and causing his regeneration. This is just the regeneration put off until the very end. Now, part of what makes this episode so much of a filler episode is the fact that the plot and story are very bare bones, and the characters, while they're characterized quite well and the acting is superb all around, there's not really any character growth. There's not any revelations. There's not any significant character changes that take place in this episode. And you could very easily just take the regeneration scene from the end of this episode and place it at the end of The Doctor Falls. And I've actually seen a couple people on YouTube make an edit of this, and you really would be none the wiser, because there's nothing really significant that takes place in this episode that really needed to happen. It's just kind of there, which is a weird thing for a Regeneration episode to have, but once again it does come down to the situation. And so in a way, The Doctor Falls holds half the burden of a Regeneration story, and so we do kind of have this weird situation where they're two separate stories, but both of them are kind of required for the Regeneration. So even though Twice Upon a Time is the actual episode where the Regeneration takes place, I feel like World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls is more of his actual Regeneration story, because it really is his final battle, and it is what ends up killing him. And I think that's especially kind of reinforced in the fact that we don't actually have a real threat in Twice Upon a Time, because we learn that they're not bad guys at all. And I actually love the line where the Doctor says he has no idea what to do when it's not an evil plan. I like that reaction to it, and it's definitely an interesting direction to take, but it makes it a very interesting situation, especially for a Regeneration story. Another thing too is This is, of course, the first Regeneration episode to be a multi-Doctor episode, and it's also interesting because it serves as a regeneration for Peter Capaldi and for the first Doctor. Now, of course, I don't say William Hartnell because David Bradley plays the first Doctor here, due to William Hartnell's unfortunate passing many years ago. I think it was in like 76. Even if he had lived a longer life, he would not be around at this time anyways. But I will say David Bradley is the best possible choice to pick up the mantle. And this actually brings me to a kind of discussion about recasting the Doctors, and that is, I do think that it's great to recast older Doctors who have passed away to do new adventures. But something going into this episode that I was really worried about was, are they going to refilm scenes from the 10th Planet, that's the first Doctor's Regeneration episode, and overwrite it with David Bradley? And I'm really glad to say that they didn't. There were a few brief moments, brief scenes that were recreated, but I don't mind that because, you know, they're just there to serve as a bridge, because in the previously section we see clips from the 10th Planet itself with the original actors, and it morphs into David Bradley, which I love. And I love even more that for the Regeneration they didn't just film David Bradley regenerating, they morphed him back into William Hartnell to regenerate into Patrick Troughton, and I think that's the best way to go about it, because it's just, I think it's disrespectful to the original actors, especially to take such a major moment as a regeneration and recreate it with the new actors in an actual episode of the show. Now, they did it in something like Adventure in Space and Time, which is fine because that's not really part of the Doctor Who canon. But I think it is disrespectful to completely refilm stuff like that with brand new actors, and it's disrespectful to the original actors' performances. So I'm really glad that they went the route of reusing the older footage, and I think it turned out really well in the episode itself. One thing I did think was weird is that they did make a mention of why First Doctor looks different. I think 12 says he's like mid-regeneration, which would have been fine, except why add an explanation that's only exclusive to this character in this specific situation when you have had, in this very same episode, different characters that have been recast? It really just makes things even more confusing, because now we have some sort of in-universe explanation, but it doesn't explain anything except this one character in this one situation. It just makes you wonder, why isn't there, if you're going to add some sort of explanation in the first place, why isn't there an explanation that covers everything? And so, like, for example, Ben and Polly in the opening sequence here, they are recast in just a brief scene, but it doesn't make sense to me, because they definitely look different, but they're obviously not mid-regeneration. And then there's also, way back in other episodes, like the Five Doctors, the first Doctor was recast as Richard Herndl, and that doesn't explain that away. So I don't know why you'd go to the trouble of coming up with this sort of explanation for the recasting, but only give it to one character in one situation, as opposed to try to come up with an umbrella thing that actually solves something. That just seems weird to me. But anyways, first thing first, I want to talk about the plot. I did mention already that it is kind of bare bones, and essentially you have this organization called Testimony, which is taking people from their timelines just before their death and extracting their memories so that they can live on, and then returning them to the right time. I think that's a really neat idea, and it serves a really great purpose in the story to allow us to have some of the previous companions back, whose exits have been pretty definitive, while still maintaining the emotional impact of their exits. Something that I feel Doctor Who fails with a lot of the time when having characters return. So, for example, I think that in Series 4, I liked Rose's return in the finale, but I thought it severely undermined her exit in Series 2. And much more recently, I think that Clara's had way too many exits. But besides that, I think that Face of the Raven was a really strong exit for her, but when she returned in Hell-Bent, even though it didn't contradict or overwrite Face of the Raven, I felt that it severely undermined the impact of it, because it completely wrecked what I thought was the emotional impact of it. It destroyed it. And I'm not going to get into details on that now because this isn't about Hellbent. I could do a whole video on that. But because it's actually physically her, it just takes away from the fact that she's gone. Because we're like, oh, well, she can just come back, so who cares if she's gone? Because look at this, she's in her TARDIS and she can just live on forever, so who cares if she's dead? And I was worried about the same thing happening with Bill. She becomes a Cyberman, and yes, at the end of the episode she did get taken away by the pilot, and essentially did become immortal, kind of like Clara, but the consequences of those things still stick because she still had to experience the pain of going through that cyber conversion, the pain of waiting a decade for the Doctor, and it was just pure torture. And I do think to bring her back, like physically, would have undermined that exit, but we didn't have her back physically because it's actually just part of testimony. It's not actually her, which I liked. And same thing with Nardol's brief appearance at the end, and especially with Clara when the Doctor gets his memories of her back. I think it was inevitable that Clara was going to make an appearance in this episode just because of her prominence in the 12th Doctor's era. I personally would not have taken an issue if we hadn't seen her and if he hadn't got her memories of her back, but I think this was the best way to do it instead of Clara showing up in her diner TARDIS, which I think is just stupid, and you know, she's actually back and she's physically there, but it's just testimony returning those memories. And it's not even, Clara in this brief scene isn't even testimony, she's just a figment of the Doctor's imagination when he gets his memories restored. And I thought that was a great way to go about it, and probably the best thing that Stephen Moffat could have done to please as many people as possible. But anyways, back on track with the plot. I think that testimony are they're fine. They're not anything amazing. To be honest, I thought the CGI was really dodgy for the glass woman. A couple times I thought that just looks terrible. It looks like it's from a video game from a decade ago, and that's really too bad, especially because a lot of the rest of the episode looks really good. But I did like the twist that they aren't actually doing something evil. The Doctor just kind of misinterpreted it. I don't understand why testimony wouldn't just tell the Doctor that earlier, because he's asking what they're doing and testimony doesn't say anything. I'm not sure why whatever it should be called, why they don't do that, but I don't know, it was a good twist. And then we return to Rusty, which I thought was a really odd choice. It's definitely a plot thread that I really didn't think had anywhere else to go, and I still feel that way. It felt completely pointless and shoehorned in there to me. I don't know why we needed to see Rusty again, and come on, biggest database in the universe, the Dalek hive mind. I get that that's a big thing, but he flat out rejects the Matrix. I'm pretty sure the Matrix is bigger than that. I can understand going to the Dalek database if Gallifrey wasn't around anymore, but come on. He says it, and then he says the Dalek hive mind is bigger. Actually, I would even understand him saying if he didn't want to go back to Gallifrey. But saying that the Dalek hive mind just is a bigger database, I don't really think that that should be a thing. I get that it's big, but as big as the Time Lords? Come on. Come on. It's just a lame excuse to get a Dalek in the episode. And it's weird because I don't think there's been a single Regeneration episode in the new series that hasn't had some form of connection to the Daleks. We've had, of course, Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways, where the Daleks were the main villains. Stolen Earth and Journey's End, even though that was only a partial regeneration, it was established that it counted as a full regeneration. That was with the Daleks as the main villains. You have The End of Time, which the Daleks don't really make an appearance, so this one is kind of on the outskirts of this, but it is all about the last great Time War, which, of course, was fought with the Daleks, and the main villain is the Time Lords trying to escape the Time War from the Daleks. You have Night of the Doctor, which is just a mini episode, but even still, it's the start of the Time War. There's mention of the Daleks, and the Doctor regenerates so he can fight in the Time War and fight against the Daleks. The Day of the Doctor featured Daleks, because once again, revolves around the Time War. Time of the Doctor featured Daleks, they were one of the main villains, and now, Twice Upon a Time, we have Rusty the Dalek appearing for some reason. And I don't know, because I never really thought there was anywhere else. I just don't know why Stephen Moffat thought Rusty should have been picked up on again. I don't see, I don't get it. I wasn't really excited to see Rusty again. I'm like, oh, okay, it's Rusty. He was in one episode. I just thought that was a really weird plot point to pick up. And it wasn't necessarily bad in the episode. It just felt weird and unnecessary. And then, of course, the other aspect to the plot is the World War I Christmas armistice, which I thought was a great way to tie Christmas into the episode, because there wasn't really a whole lot of Christmassy stuff going on, and I don't think that a Christmas special needs to be all about Christmas, as we've seen in past Christmas specials. However, I do think that Christmas should play at least some role, even if it's just the setting of the entire episode, or if, you know, it's some sort of plot point. It should play some role. And that's something I was really disappointed about with the return of Dr. Mysterio last year, because there was a mention of Santa, and that was it. We didn't even see any Christmas decorations, we didn't see any snow, there was nothing to connect it to Christmas, which, in a Christmas special, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. You don't have to make Christmas a necessary part of the episode, but at least, like, set it at Christmas or something. It should have some connection, I feel. But anyways, I was really glad to see them tying that armistice into it, and I thought it was a really beautiful moment when the soldiers from both sides just start singing and they join together and stop fighting. I thought that was fantastic. And connecting it through Mark Gatiss' character, the captain, was a really good way to do it, with the Doctor saving him by parking the TARDIS a couple hours in the future to when the Christmas armistice was about to start. I thought that was really well done and a really touching moment. But anyways, that's about it for the plot elements. Now let's talk about the characters. These are the big things, because like I said, even though there's not really much character progression, there is a lot of good characterization here. I'm going to start off with the captain. I thought it was a really neat tribute to have him related to Brigadier Lethbridge-Stewart. That was one of the theories that was going around. I didn't particularly expect that one to turn out to be true, but I liked it. I thought that it was subtle enough that it worked really well, and I think that was the problem with the big Cyberbrig thing a couple of years ago in Series 8, because that was not subtle whatsoever. And I know a lot of people felt like it really disrespected his character, but I think this was a really good tribute to him. We have, now, behind the scenes, Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat say it's his grandfather, but other sources say it's his great-uncle. So, I don't know. It's great-uncle or grandfather. It doesn't really matter all that much. But I thought he was a great tribute, because he's brave, he's valiant, he's ready to do what he has to do. And if it means it's his time to die, he's ready to go. But he also feels very human, because after he gets saved, he has this little speech about trouble with hope. That's because it makes you afraid. And it just felt like a very real moment. And I just completely believed his character throughout it. And a big applause to Mark Gatiss, because he sold the character so well. He's a really good actor, honestly. And I think the best, one of the best lines in the episode is when the Doctor accidentally reveals he's a World War I captain, and he's just confused. What do you mean World War I? I thought that was so, it's just heartbreaking, and I thought there were just moments like that throughout it that just really made you relate to the character, and you know, you cared for him a lot. Next up, I'm going to talk about Bill. Now, I'm kind of iffy on her character involvement here, because, in all honesty, while I enjoyed her presence in the episode, I feel like, honestly, the role that she had was the role I expected the first Doctor to have in the episode, and that was trying to convince 12 to regenerate. But that was, and as a result, I don't really have all that much to say about Bill's character here, because most of it is just in relation to One's role. So I think I'm just going to move past that and just talk about One, who I think, while for the most part, he was characterized really well, and David Bradley is so perfect for this role. He just sells it completely, and I never once, for a second, doubted that he was the first Doctor, except for some of the writing. But in terms of performance-wise, I think that overall, it felt like a rather uneventful meeting, which, when Doctors meet, that should not be uneventful. And something should be affected, something should be happening. But the problem is, even though 12 convinces one to regenerate, and one is having these issues, and through this adventure he resolves those issues were only created for this episode. So there's a bit of a gray area there, because what does this really add? Nothing. And he doesn't really do anything to convince 12 to regenerate. That's part of the problem that I mentioned earlier with the lack of characters developing or moving forward, or character revelation, stuff like that, is that I expected one to be the one in Bill's role convincing the Doctor that he has to regenerate, or even not even that, but through the Doctor trying to convince one to regenerate, he's going to learn that he has to regenerate, not be told by Bill. So I feel like if Bill wasn't in this episode, one would have had an actual purpose. But as it stands, while their interactions were fun, and I really enjoyed seeing David Bradley as the first Doctor in the episode, his role feels really kind of useless. He's just there just for the sake of him being there. Which is a shame, because going into this episode I really thought he had a real story purpose for returning. I feel like when a character has moved on from the show, before you bring them back, you have to have a story reason. You can't just be like, I want to bring this character back, without having some sort of story-based reason first. And I thought, going in, I knew what that story reason was. But that ended up going to Bill. So, I don't know. I'm kind of half and half. Well, not quite half and half. See, that's what tears me apart here. It's because, even though he's rather pointless, he was a lot of fun, and I was really glad we got to see David Bradley as the first Doctor in the show. So, I'm not really sure how I feel about that. But he has some great characterization moments, I think, that line up with one spectacularly. There's the fact that he's going hands-free. He berates 12 for using his sonic sunglasses and sonic screwdriver. Use your eyes. Just look. Pay attention. He's confused as to why the Doctor is so charismatic and just, I guess, dramatic. That's a good word for it. He doesn't know why he's being so dramatic about it all. Because one is he's still relatively young. He hasn't built up this reputation of the defender of the earth, this big hero. He doesn't have that reputation. He's just a traveler who's just trying to do good. And so it's really interesting to see that contrast. And I think one moment that I particularly love is when they're inside the testimony ship and they show the first Doctor his future, and give all these sorts of names. Doctor of War, I can't really remember many of the other names, but he's just terrified. David Bradley's look, he sells it so beautifully. And he's incredulous as to how he can become this man, because they're just so different. But time for me to take issue with something, and this is a glaring issue. The problem is, and actually, it makes it so much worse that the rest of him is characterized so well, because for some reason Moffat thought it was a good idea to make the first Doctor a blatant sexist. Which is just stupid. I get he's trying to emulate the feel of the 1960s and try to prepare the way for the 13th Doctor, which is of course female, with 12, showing his disapproval and all that, but it was just so dumb. I mean, yes, those kinds of attitudes are from the 60s, but they didn't really ever show up in the first Doctor's era. Most definitely not from one himself. Speaking as somebody who's seen all of William Hartnell's episodes at least a couple times each, I cannot think of any specific moments where he was so blatantly sexist. I'm sure there were a few occasions where he might have said something that by today's standards is definitely cringeworthy, but one, is very few and far between. Two, it's subtle. There's definitely nothing blatant like what was on display here. Because I counted at least 5 occasions of blatant sexism in this episode. And it's also all played for laughs, which I think is just so wrong. I mean, if you're gonna... It just paints a bad light on the First Doctor. And just to demean a character like that, who they really are, just for a few cheap laughs, is just not right. And I know in his mind he wasn't demeaning the First Doctor, and I know to a lot of casual viewers he's probably not. But speaking as somebody who really enjoys the First Doctor's era, I personally find it kind of offensive, honestly, that he characterized one like that. And it just sucks because everything else about him is done so well. And it just makes it hurt even more. Because it's fine if you do it once, maybe twice. That's alright. I can understand that. That's fine. But doing it so many times and doing it so blatantly and obviously is just terrible. He's just hitting you over the head with it again and again, and it's just like, please, just stop. And I was thinking, I was having the same reaction as 12 was, but for the different reasons. Because it's not who 1 was. And that's really my main issue with it, because if this was my first real introduction to the First Doctor, I would get the impression that he was a sexist. That this was a, maybe not prominent, but a significant part of his character, which is most definitely is not. And so that's just really unfortunate, especially because I enjoyed the rest of his characterization so much. And finally we have, of course, the 12th Doctor himself. So, I think that Peter Capaldi, as always, does a great job, but there's really not a whole lot of substance to his character in this episode. I don't really get very much out of it. Usually I have something to say about the Doctor from the episode, but I really don't have a lot to say at all. It's just, like I said, this episode only exists to prolong the regeneration, and that's what it feels like. It feels like the character is only in the episode so that you can regenerate at the end. It doesn't feel like he has any other purpose, which is really just too bad for a Doctor's final episode, because he should be at the forefront, he should be doing heroic things, he should be just at his height of his characterization, which I think that the Dr. Falls honestly did really, really well. But this here, it definitely feels like a step down in terms of the characterization. And that's really disappointing to see, because this is potentially the last time Peter Capaldi will ever play the Doctor on screen. There's always the possibility he'll come back for a multi-Doctor special, but we don't know for sure. So that is just a tiny bit underwhelming to see. Like I said, it wasn't like it was bad characterization or anything. It's just basic. And it's disappointing. And I feel like his speech at the end was really the best part about his character in the episode. But even then, there were elements of it I wasn't a huge fan of. I actually really liked his last words, but there were some elements that kind of felt shoved in there for no reason. For example, like the line about only children can hear the Doctor's name, which I know that was put in there because it was a theory that Peter Capaldi had when he was asked about it at a convention. But just because he comes up with a theory and it sounds kind of neat doesn't mean it should be in the actual episode, because as it stands, it just felt Stephen Moffat was like, well, he's saying a speech, let's put that in there, and it didn't really feel like it belonged. So I wasn't a huge fan of stuff like that, or like the line about the never eat pears, but I thought his final words were really good. Laugh hard, run fast, be kind, Doctor, I let you go. I actually really liked that. And then the regeneration happens, which I also have mixed feelings on the regeneration, mainly because of the TARDIS. For some stupid reason I cannot understand, The new series seems to think that the TARDIS has to go haywire when the Doctor regenerates. What? I don't get it. At all. I can understand it happening once, maybe twice, but this is like the fourth regeneration in a row that is in terms of like chronologically for the Doctor, and not including his kind of half regeneration where he still stayed the same body, where the TARDIS has just gone haywire after the regeneration, which is just so weird because in the classic series it was established that the TARDIS actually helped with the regeneration and helped to stabilize it. And now it just goes absolutely crazy, and I have no idea why. And the other thing too is this time the TARDIS gets blown up, which also happened just 2 regenerations ago in the end of time, and it just feels like a repeat. And it's like, okay, I get you want a new TARDIS interior, but do you really think that blowing it up is the only option to do that? No, we just had that, and every other TARDIS interior change is just unceremonious. Just changed. Why can't the Doctor just change the interior? Because, I don't know, she feels like changing it. Huh? Wow, what a crazy idea. No, it's just, it feels like it's false action. It's in there just for the sake of being an action scene, and I think that's dumb. Especially for a Doctor's first scene, it should be more subtle. We should be able to be focusing on the Doctor and not on the TARDIS crashing. And we should be able to get to spend, even if it's brief, some amount of time with the new Doctor and be able to just get some sort of sense of the actor and who they are. And even though the personality is all over the place in the Doctor's first scene, almost always, it's still some sort of good indicator. It's you get a sense of how the actor will play the character, what the actor is like, and I think that's really important. And usually we have gotten that even when the TARDIS is crashing in the past, but this time we didn't. We got two words from Jodie Whittaker, and then the TARDIS just blows up, action for no reason. We don't get any time to spend with her. There were 2 things I liked about Jodie Whittaker's opening scene. First thing was the morph from Peter Capaldi into her, which was just the eyes. I thought that was a really neat way of doing it, especially because the first we saw of Peter Capaldi's Doctor in the show was of his eyes in the 50th anniversary. The second thing is the ring dropping off the finger. I really like that. Other than that, I really wasn't a huge fan of the sequence. Also because the point of view shots and everything, they felt like to me they belonged in a YouTube reveal video, like Jodie Whittaker's actual reveal video, than an actual episode of the show. And so that just kind of took me out of it. And also, I thought that, I don't know, the way it was shot or edited or something about it should have been changed, because there's a shot where the TARDIS is shaking, trying to get her out, and I understood after watching it 3 or 4 times that it was because it was about to explode, so it was trying to save her. But the first couple times I watched it, I thought it was rejecting her and throwing her out because it didn't like his new incarnation. Which I was like, what the heck? Why would you want to do that for a Doctor you're trying to make people accept? But then I realized, oh, it's trying to save her. But it was just done really poorly because it seemed like it was rejecting her. So if the TARDIS is rejecting her, why should the audience not also reject her? Right? That really could have been presented a lot better. But what especially annoys me is that with such a different and controversial choice as Jodie Whittaker, because she's the first female Doctor, their priority should have been on reassuring the doubters and trying to make sure that people know she is still the Doctor. That the people who are worried about this casting choice won't have to worry anymore. And they completely failed to do that because they just threw in action. And in all honesty, it felt like they threw that in to distract from the fact that it's a female Doctor. Instead of trying to justify it, they tried to distract from it, which is not a good thing to do at all. Because I'm the kind of fan who's going to watch the show no matter what, but I have my reservations. And if I was the kind of fan who was considering not watching the show anymore, this would do nothing to reassure me and nothing to convince me that I should stick around. If I was considering quitting the show because of this casting, I would be so unaffected by this. I'd just be like, why should I keep watching? It gives no reason for the doubters to continue on, which I think was a really poor choice. Which is a shame, because I do think her first words, also I forgot to mention, I do think her first words are good as well. Just because it was a good idea to not specifically make the Doctor reference that she's a woman now. I don't think it necessarily needed to be specifically addressed, but it shouldn't have been distracted, because you should have just focused on making sure we know she's the same person, and they didn't do that at all. So that was just really disappointing. One final element is, of course, this is not just Peter Capaldi's last episode, but Stephen Moffat's and potentially many others as well on the crew, and it definitely does feel like the end of an era and moving into a new one. What's interesting is, I think that it was a good way to wrap up Peter Capaldi's era, honestly. Even though I preferred The Doctor Falls in terms of the regeneration, I think as a final episode, this did a better job of wrapping things up. And I also feel that same way about Stephen Moffat. Like I said, I'm really glad he didn't just throw in everything he could. I think it was good that he kind of paced himself a little bit. And I was glad to see that, and it felt like a fitting final episode for the both of them. Then another person this episode is most likely the final one for is Murray Gold, who has been composing the music for the show ever since it returned in 2005. It has not been officially confirmed that he's leaving, but it's been heavily rumored for a couple of months now. And based off of the fact that Chris Chibnall seems to be bringing in completely new everything, and the soundtrack for this episode, I think it's pretty likely and would not be surprised whatsoever. The reason I say the soundtrack is because there's a lot of his old music being reused here. There's very little original music in here, which normally I might be complaining about, but honestly I don't mind it. I think that if this is his final episode, then that was a really fitting way to wrap up his era on the show in music form. And also, I think that the music did fit. I think reusing pieces like All the Strange Creatures, the Doctor's theme from way back in Series 1, Breaking the Wall, we have a little portion of I Am the Doctor, we have a variant of Doomsday from Series 2, all that kind of thing. They all fit really well in the episode. And I thought it's a good way of just rounding up some of his best hits while doing it in a way that serves the episode's purpose, and I thought it was really well done. And from what it seems, this is going to be the hardest refresh yet, because even though Series 5 had a pretty significant refresh, it still retained a lot of the behind-the-scenes crew and a lot of the writers from the Russell T Davies era, but it seems like Chris Chibnall is going to be completely new. According to Mark Gatiss, it's a completely new writing team. Once again, rumors Murray Gold is leaving. We're probably, of course, we're having a new Doctor, new companions, new TARDIS, I assume new Screwdriver, and of course we're going to have a new title sequence and logo, and those haven't been officially stated yet, but I think it's pretty obvious that that's going to happen. And in all honesty, I think, from what I can tell, Chris Chibnall himself is the only element of his era that's going to be retained from the previous eras, which I think it's going to be really interesting to see this new direction that the show is going to go. And so Twice Upon a Time serves as the end of many eras, not just one. It serves for the end of the 4 years of Peter Capaldi, the 8 years or so that Stephen Moffat was showrunner, the 12 or 13 years that Murray Gold's been writing for the show. It's just encompassing so much. And it's really sad to see it go, but it's really exciting to look forwards to the future. And I do think that Twice Upon a Time, like I said, while it's filler, it's really enjoyable filler, and I am glad that we have it. So I think I'm going to give the episode a 7.5 out of 10. It's not great, but it has a lot to enjoy in it, and I think it's definitely worthy as the finale to so many eras. And so, anyways, those are my thoughts and opinions on Twice Upon a Time. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please put your thoughts on the episodes down below. I'm actually also going to put my ratings for all the Christmas specials and all the Regeneration episodes in the description below, so you guys can go ahead and do that as well. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And Murderman for over and out. I'll see you guys later.